The council questioned me again today.
They question you often,
They claim they are protecting the kingdom.
or protecting their own power.
You think they oppose me?
I think powerful men rarely enjoy seeing another man become more powerful than they are. A king should not have to fight his own council to rule his own kingdom.
They have served this palace for years.
Years can turn loyalty into entitlement. They forget something, my king,
And what is that?
that the throne belongs to you, not to them.
You always know what to say.
No, my king, I only say what others are too afraid to tell you.
Every kingdom has its weakness, and the weakness of Umuozala was not its walls, not its warriors, not the depth of its treasury. The weakness of Umuozala was seated on the Oji throne in the fine form of King Namdi Ezechukwu, a powerful man who had never, in his 40 years of life, met a woman who looked him dead in the eyes and smiled like she already knew what he was thinking. That was about to change. The New Yam Festival brought many things to the palace: fresh harvest, music that lasted 3 days, visitors from across Anioma land bearing gifts, seeking favor, angling for position. And among the new servants recruited from Ibusa that season, it brought Omawumi. She was 26 years old, born in a modest compound, raised by a mother who had taught her early that the world was divided into two kinds of people: those who wait for life to give them something, and those who decide what they want and go and take it. Omawumi had listened to that lesson and added her own addendum, that if what you want happens to belong to someone else, the fastest route to it runs straight through their heart. She had not come to Mozala to serve Yam. She had come to serve herself. From her first day inside the palace walls, she moved differently from the other servants. While the other new girls walked with their heads down, startled by every footstep, Omawumi walked through the corridors of the palace like she was memorizing a home she intended to keep. She noted the placement of guards. She noted which elders held real influence over the king and which ones were merely ceremonial. She noted the schedules of the queens, when Queen Ifunaya held her trade meetings, when Queen Chiamaka took her evening walk, and she noted the hours the king spent alone in the inner courtyard. Those quiet hours, she decided, were her opening. She began her campaign with the most deceptively simple weapon available to her: presence. She arranged to be where the king would see her, not constantly, that would be obvious, but at intervals precisely calculated to plant a seed of curiosity without yet answering it. She would appear at the edge of the courtyard during his evening rest, moving gracefully between tasks, never lingering, never staring, just enough to register, just enough to make him wonder, when she was gone, where she had gone. By the 4th day, he had noticed her. By the 7th day, he was looking for her. By the 10th day, he spoke to her. The first real conversation happened at dusk in the inner courtyard, where the king took his evening cup of palm wine away from the noise of the palace. The air smelled of roasted yam and river water carried on the breeze. Torches lined the walls, throwing warm gold light across the red stone floor. He had not planned to speak to her. He had simply found himself watching her arrange fresh kolan on a ceremonial tray at the far end of the courtyard, the deliberate slowness of her movements, the way she tucked a loose braid behind her ear without interrupting the task. And before he had consciously decided anything, he had crossed the courtyard toward her.
You are new here.
Yes, my king. I came with the Yam Festival season.
From where?
Ibusa, my king. Though I confess, Ibusa began to feel very small once I saw these walls.
Most people who enter this palace for the first time are afraid.
I have heard that fear and excitement feel the same in the chest. I think I have simply been choosing which one to call it.
What is your name, beautiful maiden?
Omawumi, my king.
Omawumi. It suits you.
That night, he thought about her 3 separate times before he fell asleep. He told himself it was nothing, a pleasant exchange with an unusually spirited girl. He was a king. He met interesting people regularly. This was unremarkable. He believed that for approximately 2 days. On the 3rd day, he summoned her. The summons came through a junior attendant. Casual, unofficial, the kind of thing that could be dismissed as a routine errand if anyone asked questions. Omawumi received it, dressed herself carefully in her finest wrapper, added a single string of coral beads at her throat, and walked to the king's private receiving room as though she had been expecting the invitation all along. Because she had. The room was quiet. 2 guards outside, a low table with wine and kola nuts. The king seated in a carved wooden chair, not the throne. Deliberately informal, she noted. He wanted this to feel personal. Good. That made everything easier. She sat across from him, arranged her wrapper with unhurried elegance, and looked at him with those eyes, warm, attentive, lit with that particular quality that powerful men spend their whole life searching for and rarely find. The feeling that they are the most interesting thing in the room. They talked for 2 hours. She asked him questions about his kingdom. Not the political questions a courtier would ask, but the personal ones. What was it like ruling a land your father had ruled before you? Did it feel like inheritance or like pressure? Did he ever grow tired of the weight of it? Did anyone ever simply ask him how he was without needing something in return? The king, who had not been asked how he was in months, possibly years, found himself answering with a candor that surprised even him. When she left that evening, she touched his hand once at the threshold of the door. Brief, light, warm, gone before he could decide what to do about it. He summoned her again the next evening, and the next, and the next. Omawumi understood something that most women in her position would not have had the patience to apply, that a king is not taken by storm. A king is taken by erosion, the way a river takes a riverbank, not in one dramatic flood, but in the persistent, gentle, daily wearing away of resistance until the bank simply yields and the water moves where it has always wanted to go. She was the water. She was very, very patient. The seduction was conducted in stages, each one calibrated to the one before it. In the first weeks, she gave him conversation, warmth, laughter that was genuine enough to be convincing. She was always slightly out of reach, agreeable but not eager, available but never desperate. When he leaned forward, she received it warmly but did not lean forward first. She let him be the one pursuing. Men like Namdi needed to feel they were the ones choosing, that something precious had been discovered, rather than that something was being offered to them. So she made herself feel like a discovery. In the second month, she introduced touch. It began innocuously, a hand briefly placed on his arm when she laughed at something he said, standing close enough when she refilled his wine cup that he could feel the warmth of her. Once, adjusting the collar of his outer wrapper that had folded inward, her fingers brushing his neck as she smoothed it. Then, stepping back calmly, as though she had simply corrected a detail, as though the slight catch in his breath had not happened. He began asking for her company outside the receiving room. A walk through the palace gardens in the late afternoon. She walked beside him rather than behind him. A small, calculated violation of protocol that he did not correct because he found he did not want to. She spoke to him as an equal, not from arrogance, but from a warm familiarity, as though they had long since moved past formality, and she was simply acknowledging what was obvious to them both. The third stage came on a cool Hamatan evening, when he had summoned her after a particularly grueling council session.
How are you, my love?
I am well, my king. But you are not. Come, sit properly. You are holding your shoulders like you are still in that council room.
The council gave me nothing but argument today. Every decision challenged, every direction questioned. I am the king of this land and I sit in that room feeling like a man defending himself at his own table.
Because they have forgotten that you are the king and not their peer. A man of your power should not have to argue for his own vision. You see further than they do, my king. That is why you sit on the throne and they sit on the stool.
You understand me, Omawumi. You are the only one in this palace who simply understands me.
I see you clearly, that is all. I have always seen you clearly, my king.
That night, for the first time, she did not leave. By morning, everything had changed. Not in the palace, not yet. But between them, a door had been opened that neither of them would close again. He felt, in the particular way that men feel these things, that something enormous had occurred. She felt it too, but where his feeling was emotional, hers was strategic. She lay beside him in the dark after he had fallen asleep, looking up at the ceiling of the king's private chamber, and allowed herself a small private smile, one stage down. The palace, however, was not a place where secrets lived long. Word spread the way it always spreads in a royal household, not through announcement, but through the collective peripheral vision of servants, guards, and attendants who see everything and say nothing out loud, while somehow ensuring that everyone knows. Queen Chamaka heard within 3 days. She was not subtle about her feelings. Queen Ifunanya heard the same day and was considerably more controlled, which somehow made her response feel more dangerous. But Omawumi had not been idle. While the queens processed what was happening, she was already advancing to the next stage. Now that the king's affections were secured, she needed visibility. She needed to be seen, not hiding in private chambers, but present, acknowledged, undeniable. She began appearing at his side in semi-public spaces. The private garden where he walked with advisors before formal sessions, the inner dining hall where he took his morning meal. She targeted the in-between spaces, the unofficial moments, the places where her presence could not easily be challenged without someone having to create an uncomfortable confrontation. On a warm afternoon, 3 months after her arrival, the king sat under the large mango tree in the inner courtyard, receiving an informal visit from 2 senior trade elders. Omawumi arrived with refreshments, set them down, and instead of withdrawing, she settled herself beside the king and stayed. Not at his feet, not at a respectful distance, beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, close enough that anyone watching understood immediately what her presence meant. The 2 trade elders exchanged a glance. The king looked at her, and instead of gesturing for her to take a more appropriate position, he reached over and took her hand. She let him hold it through the rest of the meeting. The elders went home that evening and talked, and by the next morning, half of Umozala was discussing what had been seen under the mango tree.
My king, we need to speak about the servant girl from Ibusa.
Her name is Omawumi, and she is no longer simply a servant.
My lord, I have been your wife for 15 years. I have protected this kingdom beside you, managed your alliances, raised your sons. I am not asking you to be a different man. I am asking you to be careful. This woman appeared from nowhere 3 months ago, and she's already sitting beside you, holding your hand in front of the trade elders. Think about what you are building.
I am not building anything. I am enjoying a companionship that this palace has not offered me in a very long time.
A companionship? Companionship does not hold a man's hand in front of council elders, my king. Ambition does.
You may leave, Ifunanya.
My king, I fear the path you tread leads to sorrow. I go, but my heart remains heavy.
Omawumi was given her own wing of the palace before the next dry season. It happened gradually, each step normalized by the one before it. First, a private sleeping chamber near the king's quarters, then a personal attendant, then 2 guards, then new wrappers commissioned from the palace tailor. Gold beads fastened around her wrist by the king himself one evening after dinner, while she smiled up at him with that look, that particular practiced look that had started everything, and said she had never owned anything so beautiful. She was lying. She had owned nothing, but she fully intended to own everything. Now, Omawumi moved to the boldest phase of her plan. Having secured his heart, his bed, and his public acknowledgement, she turned her attention to his mind, specifically to the people who filled it with advice she didn't want him to listen to. She began with the council. Her method was simple and devastatingly effective. She never attacked anyone directly. Direct attacks provoke defense, and defense produces loyalty. Instead, she planted questions, small, precise questions delivered in the warmth of private moments that made the king begin to look at his trusted advisors through a different lens. When Elder Chike submitted a trade proposal that limited the king's personal revenues in favor of the kingdom's general fund, a thoroughly reasonable proposal that Nnamdi would previously have approved without much thought, Omawumi said nothing about the proposal itself. She simply asked, while arranging his outer robes one morning, whether Elder Chike had always been so invested in telling the king how to manage his own resources, and whether the king had ever wondered why. She said it lightly, almost absently, like she was thinking out loud. But the seed was in the soil. When the head warrior Obiageli reported troop morale concerns and requested a public address from the king, routine, sensible, Omawumi noted that it was interesting how often men who wanted public attention managed to find reasons to require the king's performance. She never raised her voice, she never made accusations, she simply, consistently introduced doubt. Within 4 months, the king had dismissed 2 senior advisors, 3 more resigned. The warriors' lodge went without clear direction for weeks. Taxes were raised to fund the comforts of a palace increasingly built around one woman's preferences. The farmers felt it first, then the market women, then the craftsmen. And Omawumi, seated beside the king at his private evening meals, wearing palace gold and carrying herself like a woman who had never been anything but royalty, felt the shift with deep satisfaction. She wanted the throne, not beside a king, for herself, or as close to herself as the structures of our Nyoma tradition would allow. She wanted the kind of power where her voice was the first voice heard when decisions were made. She wanted advisors who reported to her. She wanted the feeling, every morning, of waking up inside the walls of the most powerful house in the land and knowing that the walls were hers. And she was very, very close. But palaces have memories, and old servants, unlike new ones, are not so easily dazzled. Adaze was 71 years old and had served in the Umuozala Palace since before Nnamdi's father had been crowned. She had the sharp, unhurried eyes of someone who has spent decades watching powerful people make spectacular mistakes. She had watched Omawumi from the beginning, not with hostility, but with recognition. She had seen this pattern before, in a different palace with a different king 30 years ago. It had not ended well that time either. She was the one who noticed the letters. A servant carrying sealed correspondence out of the palace at unusual hours. The same messenger, 3 weeks running, through the same side entrance at midnight, carrying letters to a destination Adaze could not identify from palace records. She said nothing. She watched. Then she brought it quietly to Queen Ifeanya. Ifeanya moved like a woman who had been waiting for exactly this. Within days, through the network of contacts she had carefully maintained throughout everything that had happened, she arranged for the next midnight messenger to be intercepted. The letters were opened, read and copied before being resealed and sent on their way, so no alarm would be raised. What the letters contained was worse than anyone had feared. Omawumi had been in contact with a rival trading faction, wealthy men from outside Anyoma land, who had long wanted access to Umuozala's river trade routes. In exchange for detailed information about the kingdom's alliances, which ones were strong, which ones were fragile, which sub-chiefs might be persuadable, Omawumi was to receive a financial arrangement and, more importantly, the permanent backing of these men for a position of influence inside the palace. She was not just seducing a king, she was selling her kingdom.
I am disappointed in you, Omawumi.
My king.
How long? How long have you been trying to sell my people? To sell my land?
My king, I do not know what...
Keep quiet, Omawumi! I should have the guards cut off your head where you kneel.
My king, please.
How long, Omawumi?
Since before my arrival, my king.
You sat in my chambers. You slept in my bed. You ate at my table. I gave you the finest jewels, the best servants in this palace. And all this time you were scheming, plotting, trying to sell my kingdom, to destroy my people. You who came here with nothing, and I made you everything.
Not all of it, my king.
Take this woman away from my sight.
The deliberations lasted 5 days. 5 full days of elders convening, dispersing, reconvening. Warriors consulted. Messages sent to the sub-chiefs whose alliances had been compromised, carrying careful language that acknowledged the situation without fully disclosing the damage. Queen Ifonaya worked through 3 consecutive nights, mapping exactly which trade relationships had been exposed and which could still be protected. Queen Chiamaka had opinions about the punishment and expressed every single one of them at full volume. Omawumi spent those 5 days confined to the holding room at the back of the guard's wing, stripped of everything that had been given to her. No silk wrappers, no gold beads, plain cotton and plain water, and guards who did not make conversation. She had time to think. She reviewed her mistakes with the analytical detachment of a strategist examining a failed campaign. She had moved too fast in the 4th month. The midnight correspondence had been a calculated risk she had assessed as acceptable, and she had assessed wrongly. She had underestimated Ifonaya's network. The old woman Adayeze, she thought. She should have identified and managed Adayeze. In the end, the elders came to their judgment. Execution was considered and set aside, not out of mercy, but out of strategy. Matters are inconvenient. A dead Omawumi could become a story that complicated the king's reputation for a decade. Instead, the judgment was public, thorough, and permanent. All gifts stripped and returned to the palace treasury, her wings sealed and rededicated to palace storage, her name formally removed from every palace record in which it appeared. She was to be escorted under guard to the boundary of Mozala land and released on the other side, with nothing beyond the plain wrapper on her back and the explicit message delivered to every settlement along the border that she was not to return. A formal declaration was also sent to the rival trading faction, informing them that their arrangement had been terminated and that the kingdom's next communication on the matter would come through the warriors' lodge rather than through diplomatic language. On the day of her removal, Omawumi was led through the palace courtyard in plain daylight. Every member of the palace, old servants and new, guards and kitchen hands, trade elders and warriors, watched in silence. She had dressed herself that morning with the same care she had always taken. Back straight, head level. She walked out of the palace the way she had walked into it, with composure, with something that looked like dignity, and with those eyes that gave away nothing. She passed the king, who stood in the courtyard watching. She did not stop. She did not speak. At the palace gate, without turning around, she walked through it. The guards followed her to the border. She was released. She did not look back at Umozala. Nobody heard from her again. The palace took time to heal. Not long. Umozala was too old, too rooted, too stubborn to bleed for long over one woman's ambition. But time, nonetheless. King Namdi reinstated Elder Chike first. The old man came back without making an event of it, sat in his customary seat, and resumed his work as though he had simply been away on a long journey. He never once said, "I told you so," which Namdi found either extremely magnanimous or deeply pointed, and was never entirely sure which. The Warriors' Lodge was reorganized under Obiagili, who accepted the task with the wary patience of a man who had been cleaning other people's messes for 40 years and expected to continue doing so until he died. Queen Ifonaya returned to her full role in the council. She and the king did not have a dramatic reconciliation, nothing like that. They were older than dramatics. They simply, over months, rebuilt the daily architecture of their partnership, each one aware of what had been broken, and each one choosing, in the way that long marriages choose, to build something better rather than replicate what had failed. Queen Chiamaka received a formal apology from the king in front of the full council. Rare, uncomfortable, and entirely deserved. She received it with her chin up, accepted it with grace, and then spent the next several years regularly reminding him of it in strategic moments, which was exactly the kind of behavior that had irritated him into trouble in the first place, and which he now recognized with a complicated mixture of exasperation and relief as the most reliable proof that she loved him. The wing of the palace that belonged to Omawumi was eventually remodeled. The king had not wanted it left sealed. Sealed rooms become stories, and he wanted no more stories from that chapter. It was rebuilt into a proper archive for the kingdom's trade records, filled with documents and scrolls and the smell of dry parchment, which was about as thoroughly unglamorous a transformation as one could arrange. The mango tree remained. Nobody suggested removing it. It was an old tree, older than the drama, and every season it produced fruit without comment, without editorial, indifferent to the various human follies conducted beneath its branches. Sometimes, in the evenings, when the palace had quietened and the torches were being lit for the night, the king would sit beneath it alone with his palm wine. The older guards would glance at him and look away again, because there was something in his expression during those quiet moments, not quite grief, not quite amusement, but something complicated that lived between the two. He had been foolish. He knew it. The whole kingdom knew it. The trade partners down the river knew it. It was the kind of foolishness that could have destroyed everything, and had it not been for an old woman who noticed a midnight messenger, it very nearly had. But he was still king, still on the throne, still holding the kingdom together with the council of good people he had been fortunate enough to push away and not permanently lose. Not every king gets to be foolish and recover. He understood that now. And somewhere beyond the borders of Umozala, Omawumi was walking, toward what destination, toward what next scheme, carrying that same straight back and those same unreadable eyes, and the kingdom she had very nearly taken was already forgetting the sound of her name. But not quite. Not yet.